Robert E. Lee, born on January 19, 1807 in Stratford Hall, Virginia, he was a bright child, taking interest in history and the tactics of war. The many people he researched were about the Revolutionary War, specifically George Washington. As many know, George Washington was a very successful man. His tactics as a general made him famous for winning the war for America. Tactics that he used were a very key role in winning the war. Without them, they would have lost. When General Lee knew about this, he automatically knew that he wanted to be a key figure in a war, leading troops in a battle and winning the war. As he grew up, Lee was taking interest in military. As a teenager, his grades weren't as good as they should have, but as he worked, he got his grades up to go to West Point, and from there his life as a general began.
From 1852 to 1855, Lee served as superintendent of West Point and was therefore responsible for educating many of the men who would later serve him under battle and those who would oppose him on the battlefields of the Civil War. In 1855, he left the academy to take a position in the cavalry, and in 1859 was called upon to put down the abolitionist John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. Because of his reputation as one of the finest officers in the United States Army, Abraham Lincoln offered Lee the command of federal forces in April 1861. Lee declined and tendered his resignation from the Army when the state of Virginia seceded on April 17th, arguing that he could not fight against his own people. Instead, he accepted a general's commission in the newly formed Confederate Army. His first military engagement of the Civil War occurred at Cheat Mountain, Virginia, now West Virginia, on September 11, 1861. It was a Union victory, but Lee's reputation withstood the public criticism that followed. He served as a military advisor to the President Jefferson Davis until June 1862, when he was given command of the wounded General Joseph E. Johnston's embattled army on the Virginia Peninsula. Lee renamed his command the Army of Northern Virginia.
Lee distinguished himself in the Mexican-American War. He was one of Winfield Scott's chief aides in the march from Veracruz to Mexico City. He was instrumental in several American victories through his personal reconnaissance as a staff officer. He found routes of attack that Mexicans had not defended because they thought the terrain was impassable. He was promoted to brevet major after the Battle of Cerro Gordo on April 18, 1847. He also fought at Contreras, Churubusco, and Chapultepec, and was wounded at the last. By the end of the war, he had received additional brevet promotions to lieutenant colonel and colonel, but his permanent rank was still captain of engineers, and he would remain as a captain until his transfer to the cavalry in 1855. For the first time, Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant met and worked with each other during the American-Mexican War. Both Lee and Grant participated in Scott's march from the coastal town of Veracruz to Mexico City. Grant gained wartime experience as a quartermaster, Lee as an engineer who positioned troops and artillery. Both did their share of actual fighting. At Veracruz, Lee earned a commendation for greatly distinguished service. Grant was among the leaders at the bloody assault at Molino de Rey, and both soldiers were among the forces that entered Mexico City. Close observations of their commanders constituted a learning process for both Lee and Grant.
Following the wounding of General Joseph E. Johnston at the Battle of Seven Pines on June 1, 1862, Lee assumed command of the Army Northern Virginia, his first opportunity to lead an army in the field. Early in the war, his men called him Granny Lee because he was allegedly timid style of command. Confederate newspaper editors of the day objected to his appointment due to concerns that Lee would not be aggressive and would wait for the Union Army to come to him. He oversaw substantial strengthening of Richmond's defenses during the first 3 weeks of June. In the spring of 1862, as part of the Peninsula Campaign, the Union Army of Potomac under General George B. McClellan advanced upon Richmond from Fort Monroe, eventually reaching the eastern edge of the Confederate capital along the Chickahominy River. Lee then launched a series of attacks, the 7-day battle against M.C. McClellan's forces. Lee's assault resulted in heavy Confederate casualties. They were marred by clumsy tactical performances by his division commanders, but his aggressive actions unnerved McClellan, who retreated to a point on the James River and abandoned the Peninsula Campaign. In conclusion, his general years as a Confederate general were substantially good, taking many victories.
After the war, Lee was not arrested or punished, but he did lose the right to vote as well as some property. Lee supported President Johnston's plan of Reconstruction, but joined the Democrats in opposing the radical Republicans who demanded punitive measures against the South. Distrusted his commitment to the abolition of slavery and indeed distrusted the region's loyalty to the United States. Lee generally supported civil rights for all as well as a system of free public schools for blacks, but dissented regarding their vote to right. Most of all, he became an icon of reconciliation between the North and South and that reintegration of former Confederates into the national fabric. Lee hoped to retire to a farm of his own, but he was too much a regional symbol to live in obscurity. He accepted an offer to serve as a president of Washington College, now Washington and Lee University, in Lexington, Virginia, and served from October 1865 until his death. There would be many memorials and statues over Lee and the war, mostly about his life as a Confederate general.
The Great Battle.
I'm Robert E. Lee, and this is my army, the Unstoppable Army.
Surrender or die, Lee. You're mincemeat.
I will never surrender.
My army is defeated! Watch us put it back together. Yeah.